Hi everyone! In this lesson we will start writing our first microservice. Let's first go to start.spring.io to download a base Spring Boot project. It is good to learn and use start.spring.io to get a Spring Boot application ready, as it really speeds up the starting point. Before continue, I would like to note that in the last section videos, I have kept track of the latest versions for Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, as well as for the other dependencies that we have used in this course. In those lectures, you will see how to use the latest versions and what are the required code and configuration changes. So, to be able to use the latest versions, please refer to the version update lectures in the last section of this course. Here we choose the Maven as the dependency management and Java as the language. We can leave the Spring Boot version as the latest stable one, which is currently 2.3.4. For group ID, I will enter com microservices demo, and for artifact ID, microservices-demo. Note that this group ID and artifact ID are used to uniquely identify a project, where group ID is the unique base name for the group that develops the project, and artifact ID is the unique name for the project itself. Let's set the name as again microservices-demo, and for description enter microservices demo project for Spring Boot. And finally for package name, enter com microservices demo. Packaging can be left as jar, and the Java version will be 11. I will not add any dependencies for now, as we will be adding dependencies when we are developing submodules and the microservices, and we will describe the dependencies there in detail. Alright, let's download the project now, and then unzip the downloaded file, and put whatever directory you want to keep your source files. And then open IntelliJ and use Open or Import Project button to open the newly downloaded project. It might take a couple of seconds for IntelliJ to import this Maven project. After importing the POM.xml file, which has the blue M sign, which indicates this is a Maven project, and if you check the source folder, it should have the correct structure for a Maven project. Source main Java for source files, source main resources for configuration and resource files, and source test Java for test source files. Here there is another file called mavenw, which is the Maven wrapper file, and it allows you to run Maven project without having Maven installed and present on the path. It downloads the correct Maven version if it is not found on the system, which is really helpful for interoperability. Now in the Java folder we have the microservices demo application class, which is annotated as Spring Boot application and has a main method. This is the Spring Boot main class and can be used to start a Spring Boot application. If you run this class, it will log that it is started successfully, but it will exit immediately as it won't do anything. Let's run this class to see if we can actually run a Spring Boot application. We see the started message, so it means everything works correctly. Alright. Actually, we will not use this source folder, as the sources will be under submodules, which we will develop in the coming lectures. So I'm going to delete these source and target folders and only leave the POM.xml file here. And we will go over this POM.xml file and make it as a base POM for our future modules and services. Here we see all the information we entered on start.spring.io. Like we have this parent Spring Boot starter and the version. We also see the group ID and artifact ID, and the name of the project, and other properties like Java version as 11. Then we have these Spring Boot starter and starter test dependencies, which are necessary to start writing a Spring Boot application. And finally here we have the Spring Boot Maven plugin, which I will explain in a bit in detail. Now I'm going to make some changes to this POM.xml file First of all, since we don't have any source files in this base project, the packaging shouldn't be jar, but should be POM. That will imply that we will use this POM as a base configuration, not for creating runnable jar. So let's change the default packaging to POM using packaging property. Second, I will create a new section for dependency management, then move all dependencies into this new section. This will help us to define all dependencies in this base POM XML without really downloading them. Any submodule that wants to include a dependency will simply overwrite and use the dependencies section in the module itself. I will also define all versions in this file so that submodules will just include a dependency without specifying the version. So I will create the Spring Boot version property in the properties section and reference it from dependencies and plugins. We do all these changes to manage the dependencies with versions in a single place in the base POM XML file and use them without hassle in the submodules and microservices. So I am adding Spring Boot version to all places here, dependencies and plugins. Finally, let's also create a plugin management and put this Spring Boot Maven plugin inside this section. Again, any service that wants to include this plugin will simply create a plugin section in the module itself without setting the version, but by setting any property or goals for this task specifically. A couple of words about Spring Boot Maven plugin. It can create executable archive files such as jar files or var files that contain all application dependencies and can be run with a single java jar command. This behavior comes by just including the plugin itself because it is pre-configured to create the target runnable jar. In addition, this plugin helps to run Spring Boot applications, generate build informations, and start your Spring Boot application prior to running integration tests. And finally, it helps to create Docker images with the build image goal, which comes with Spring Boot 2.3.0 release. We will actually be using this property to create Docker images for our microservices in the coming lectures. Well, we also need another plugin here, which is called Maven Compiler plugin. By default, Maven uses Java 1.6 version for source and target settings. And since we need to use Java 11, we will use Maven Compiler plugin to set this property. Let's go to Maven Apache org and check the usage of Maven Compiler plugin, and copy the plugin section to put in our plugin section in the Maven POM XML file. Note that this is not in the management section, as we need this plugin application-wide, so that we can define it here to be used in submodules without needed to overwrite. And one more thing is that, starting with Java 9, we need to use release property. So I will replace source and target properties with the release property and set as 11 here. Note that if you use Java 8, we would leave the source and target properties here instead of release. Let's also create a version in the properties section for this plugin and refer it from the plugin itself. Before closing up this lecture, let's also initialize a Git project. First, here in the downloaded Spring Boot application project, you also see a file called .gitignore, which actually sets the patterns to exclude from Git, such as IntelliJ internal files or log files. We will use git init command to initialize a Git project so that we can follow all changes on Git and commit our changes locally and then push them to any remote repository. Let's then see the status first using git status commands, and then add all the files we created with git add dot command. And then commit the current project as initial commit using git commit -am initial commit command. Here -a stands for all, to commit all the files, and -m stands for message, and we set a message here which is initial commit in this comment. Alright, in the next lecture we will create a submodule for our microservice and then start writing some code. Before closing up this lecture, I want to remind you that there is a section at the end of the course for updating versions to the latest releases for Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, and for other dependencies. At the time of this video, the latest Spring Boot release is 2.3, but if you want to work with latest releases, please follow the lectures in the last section, which will be updated continuously when new versions arrive for our dependencies. Alright, I will see you in the next section.